In March of 2023, I lit the same candle I'd been lighting for a decade. Same place, same pew, same cold silence that sat heavy in the air like dust. But this time, someone else had lit same kind of candle just a few inches away, and tucked inside its wax was a note. No name, no date, just 5 words scratched in black ink. He's alive. Stop looking. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury, and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name is David Langley. I'm 51 now, and I've lived in the same town in northern Georgia since I was 19. Place called Morning Ridge. 1 grocery store, 1 high school, 2 churches. I worked the mail route for most of my life, first on foot, then in a county truck when my knees started giving out. Retired early, but I still shelve books at the public library a few days a week. Keeps me busy. My wife Rachel and I have been in the same green-painted house for over 20 years. Raised our son there, Tommy. The backyard's got a garden she tends every spring, and there's an old wind chime on the front porch that still knocks around in the breeze. Nothing fancy, just quiet, safe. The kind of life where you always know what time the mail comes and which neighbor will wave from their driveway. Every year on March 22nd, I go to St. Jude's. That's the older church in town. The one with the stone steps and the stained glass windows that catch the morning sun just right. They keep it open on Wednesdays for quiet prayer. No service, no music, just stillness. 10 years ago, Tommy disappeared, walked home from school, and never made it to our front door. I don't talk much about that day anymore. Folks stopped asking. Rachel and I grieved the way people do when the world stops moving, but yours keeps going. She planted daffodils. I lit candles. Same candle every year. White votive gold cross etched on the side. No inscription. No date. Just light. This year I sat in the 4th pew from the front. Same spot. Brought the candle from home like I always do. Lit it, said "Happy Birthday, Tommy," and sat back down. He'd have turned 17 that day. The church was empty, quiet as always. But then I saw it. Another candle. Same size, same shape, maybe 2 spots over from mine. I would have noticed if it had been there when I arrived. The wax was still soft, slight lean to the flame like someone had just walked away. I leaned closer and saw something caught inside the wax. A slip of paper burned at the edge. I pulled it out, careful not to tear it. He's alive. Stop looking. I must have read it 10 times before I could breathe again. The rest of that day passed in pieces. Coffee with Rachel, the usual morning walk, an hour sorting old storage boxes in the basement. But nothing felt solid. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I drove back to the church. The doors were locked, but the spare key was still in the usual spot, tucked under the stone angel behind the maintenance shed. Inside the sanctuary was dark. My footsteps echoed in the stillness. Every votive had burned down to nothing but wax puddles and scorched glass. Except one. The one with the dented base. Same candle. Same flaw. I picked it up, still faintly warm. Whoever lit it hadn't come to pray. They came to send a message. And that's when something shifted. Not in the world. In me. Because for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't sure Tommy was gone. I wasn't even sure I was the only one still looking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning the note over in my mind. Those 5 words had more weight than any letter or prayer I'd ever received. He's alive. Stop looking. I didn't tell Rachel. I couldn't. She'd buried her hope years ago, and I wasn't ready to hand it back to her just to watch it shatter again. I stayed up late going through old boxes in the basement. Most of it hadn't been touched in years. Tommy's drawings, a toy car with chipped red paint birthday cards from when he was still small enough to believe in magic. But at the bottom of one plastic bin, I found the copy of the police file. It wasn't the full report. They'd redacted most of it before handing it over, but it still had the basic timeline. May 17th, 2013. Tommy left school at 2:45 p.m. A classmate saw him walking alone near Ashbury Street around 3. Rain started at 3:10. A neighbor spotted a boy with a red backpack standing at Willow and 6th about 10 minutes later. By 3:30, Rachel had called me at work. By 3:40, I was already out canvassing the block. The police were notified by 4:15. That entire window from school to missing was under an hour. And in that hour, the world had shifted just slightly and never shifted back. I must have read that timeline 100 times over the years. But this time I saw something I hadn't paid much attention to before. Just a brief note at the end. Local church St. Jude's held vigil for missing child May 21st. Volunteers accessed building through staff entrance. No cameras. I sat with that for a long time. Same church where I lit the candle every year. Same place the note had been left. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe I was connecting dots that weren't there. But it didn't feel like nothing. The next day I walked to the church office. It was tucked in a brick building next to the sanctuary mostly used for announcements and record keeping. Judy, the admin, had been there since I was a teenager. She looked up from her desk and gave me a soft smile. "David," she said, "it's been a while." I told her I was looking for any old records from Tommy's vigil. Volunteer names, sign-in sheets, anything. She hesitated for a second, then nodded toward a metal file cabinet near the window. "We keep old event logs by date. You're welcome to check." It took me about 15 minutes to find the right folder. Inside was a single sign-in sheet, yellowed and water-stained. I recognized Rachel's name, mine too. A few others, Megan, Father John. But one name pulled at me, Ava S. That had to be Ava Schmidt. She was one of Rachel's friends from the yoga group back then. Young kind, always organizing things. I hadn't thought of her in years. I asked Judy if Ava still lived in town. "I think so," she said. "She helped with the Christmas pageant last year. Want me to check the contact sheet?" 10 minutes later, I had a phone number and an address. When I got home, Rachel was in the kitchen stirring something on the stove. She asked how it went, and I told her it was quiet, same as always. I didn't mention the note. Not yet. That evening, I stepped out into the garage and dialed Ava's number. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice was tired but steady. When I introduced myself, there was a pause. "Oh my God," she said. "Mr. Langley, I didn't expect..." I asked if she remembered the vigil. Anything unusual? People who weren't from the church? "I might," she said, "but I'd rather not talk on the phone. Can we meet?" We met the next day at a coffee shop on the far edge of town. She looked older, streaks of gray near her temples. Coat buttoned all the way to the neck, but still had that same calm, deliberate way of speaking. We sat near the window. She sipped her tea for a while before saying anything. "There was a man that night," she said. "I don't remember his name. He showed up late, wore a suit like he'd just left a meeting, asked a lot of questions. I asked what kind." She looked down at her hands. "About you. About Tommy. He said he wanted to help, but something felt off. He didn't light a candle, didn't pray, just stood near the back and watched. I asked if anyone else noticed him. She shook her head. I asked Father John about him afterward. He said he didn't remember him at all." I pulled out my phone and opened a scan of the old newspaper article from the vigil. There was a photo, a grainy black and white of the crowd. In the far right corner, a tall man stood alone. No candle, no expression, just observing. I turned the screen toward her. "Is that him?" She stared at it. "That's him," she said quietly. "That's the man." I nodded, then told her what I'd found at the church, the second candle, the note. Her eyes widened. After all this time, I nodded. "Do you think he's still alive?" she asked. I hesitated. "I don't know, but someone knows more than they ever said." The next morning, I woke before the sun. Rachel was still asleep, her hand resting on the empty side of the bed where Tommy used to crawl in during thunderstorms. I went downstairs and dumped out the old coffee she'd left burning in the pot. The air was cold and damp. I stepped out onto the back steps just to breathe. That's when my phone buzzed. No caller ID. Just unknown. I answered. Silence at first. Then a low, warped voice. "Let him go," it said. "You're not helping anyone by digging this back up. He's safe. That's more than most get." I gripped the phone. "Who is this?" There was a pause. "Just stop, or the next candle is yours." Then the line went dead. I stood there a long time, staring out at the neighbor's fence, the sky turning pale with morning. I didn't tell Rachel. I didn't know how to. Not yet. That afternoon, I drove back to the church, parked a few blocks away, and walked the rest. Inside, it looked the same as it always had. Quiet, steady, eternal. But now I saw it differently. I walked to the votive rack, found the candle with the dented base. No new note. But a trail of wax led down the side of the altar rail like someone had carried it too fast or tilted it while walking. I followed the drips past the baptismal font through the back hallway. They stopped outside a locked janitor's closet. I tried the handle. Nothing. Just silence behind the door. I glanced around, then stepped back. Down the side hallway near the offices, I found the utility room. It was unlocked. Nothing strange inside, just shelves, old hymnals, a mop bucket. But under a rolled-up mat, I spotted something odd. A trap door. I pulled it open. A narrow staircase led down into the crawl space beneath the church. It smelled like damp wood and mildew. I turned on my phone's flashlight and climbed down. The space was tight, maybe 5 feet high, with rough concrete and cold earth. There were footprints in the dirt, faint but human. They led to the far wall where the foundation had cracked. And just near that crack, half buried under a loose board, was a red canvas shoe. Small. Untied. I picked it up. My throat closed. It was Tommy's. One of the pair we bought the spring before he vanished. He'd loved those shoes. Wore them everywhere. Wouldn't take them off even for bed. I sat there a moment holding it in my hands. Then I saw it on the wall above the shoe. 2 letters scratched into the concrete. TL. I climbed back up, heart pounding. No cameras, no records. But someone had been down there. Someone had kept this. And someone still wanted me to stop. I didn't go home right away. I drove to the cemetery, parked near the edge, and sat in silence. The shoe sat on the passenger seat beside me. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew it wasn't over. That night I got a second call. This time I didn't answer, but they left a voicemail. No words, just breathing. Slow, controlled, listening. I didn't tell Rachel about the shoe, not that night. I sat with it in Tommy's old room for almost an hour, just holding it in my lap, letting the weight of it settle. The tread was still faintly caked with dust from under the church, but the fabric, red canvas, white rubber toe was mostly clean, preserved, like someone had taken care of it. I turned it over in my hands until I noticed something I'd missed. The heel had a faint scuff mark, same place where Tommy used to drag his foot across the pavement when he didn't want to come inside. It felt too specific to be coincidence. I tucked it in the inside pocket of my coat and left the room as quietly as I'd entered. The house was still. Rachel had gone to bed. But when I passed the kitchen, I saw the faint yellow light over the stove and the postcard she'd left on the table months earlier. I'd found it once by accident, stuffed in the back of the junk drawer behind a roll of tape and a couple of expired coupons. No return address, just a picture of a boardwalk shot from behind a group of people facing the ocean. I picked it up again. There was a teenage boy in the frame, tall, lean, maybe 16 or 17. Back to the camera. Brown hair, same build as Tommy. It wasn't proof, not even close. But it was something. I brought it upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed. Rachel stirred. She saw the postcard in my hand and sat up slowly. "I didn't want to bring it up," she said, voice low, eyes still adjusting. It felt like hope, and I didn't want to put you through that again. I nodded. "Where did you get it?" "Found it in the mailbox last year. No stamp, no note. I didn't ask why she hadn't told me. I already knew. Sometimes silence feels like protection. Sometimes it's just fear." I told her about the candle, the note, the shoe I'd found under the church. Her hands went still in her lap. "Do you remember Daniel?" she asked. My chest tightened. Daniel had helped with the original search effort. Quiet, well-spoken, always seemed to know where he was needed. He brought bottled water for volunteers, passed out maps of the neighborhood. I hadn't seen him since. Rachel nodded slowly. "I ran into him last summer. At the farmer's market. He asked about you." "And Tommy." She didn't say it right away, but I saw it in her eyes. "He gave me a strange feeling," she said, like he already knew the answer before he asked. I stood up and looked out the window. The street was dark. Our neighbor's porch light buzzed softly in the distance. No sign of the silver sedan I'd seen a few nights ago, but its absence didn't ease anything. "We need to be careful," I said. She got up and walked to the fireplace. I handed her the shoe. She took it gently, like it might shatter. "Bring him home," she said. The next day I met with Ava again. Her apartment was small upstairs over an old storefront on the edge of town. Inside smelled faintly of lavender and burnt coffee. She poured me tea and sat across from me at the kitchen table. I remembered something else she said. The man from the vigil, the one in the suit, he wore a pin. Small gold like a lighthouse or maybe an anchor. I didn't think much of it at the time. I leaned back in the chair. Daniel had a pin like that. Said it was from some non-profit he worked with. I pulled up the scanned newspaper photo again, showed her the man in the background off to the side, alone, watching. She leaned in close. "That's him." She walked to a drawer and pulled out a sheet of printer paper. "I did some digging," she said. "The postcard Rachel got it wasn't processed through the mail system. No cancellation mark, no barcode, which means someone delivered it by hand." I stared at the photo again. The shape of the boy's shoulders, the way he stood, arms tucked slightly behind him, head tilted just enough to feel familiar. "They're not trying to help," Ava said quietly. "They're trying to keep you from getting too close." That night, Rachel placed the red shoe on the mantel next to Tommy's third-grade photo. Neither of us said much, but for the first time in a long while, we weren't moving through grief. We were moving through something else. Something with direction. The next morning, I packed a small bag, left a note for Rachel, and drove 4 hours south to the coast. The postcard had been printed locally in a town called Briar's Hollow. Tourist spot, mostly. Saltwater taffy, sketch artists, t-shirt stands. I arrived just past noon. Fog clung low over the rooftops, and the sea air felt heavier than I expected. I parked near the marina and walked east along the boardwalk, phone in hand, comparing details from the photo, the sculpture near the pier, the curved railings, the benches. It all lined up. I stood in the same place where the picture had been taken. A few vendors were setting up. Gulls wheeled overhead, and then I heard a voice, singing. A boy, maybe 16 or 17, sat near the edge of the pier, strumming a worn guitar. He sang softly, almost under his breath, like the music was more for himself than for anyone else. It took me a second to recognize the song, Golden Slumbers. I used to sing it to Tommy when he was little. Usually when he couldn't sleep or after a bad dream. I hadn't heard it in years. My chest went tight. I stepped closer. The boy looked up. Brown hair, sharp jawline, familiar in ways I didn't have words for. His eyes met mine, and then he ran, dropped the guitar on the bench and sprinted across the boardwalk, cutting through the crowd like he knew the layout by heart. I chased after him. My legs didn't move like they used to, but I didn't stop. He darted behind a seafood shack and disappeared down a narrow alley. I rounded the corner. Empty. Just damp pavement and the sound of my own breath. I spent the next hour walking the streets, checking shop windows, asking around. Most people shook their heads, but one vendor said he knew the kid. "Calls himself Lucas," the man said. "Sings sometimes, real quiet. Sleeps out at the trailer park." I drove there next. Old rusted mailboxes, faded paint on the siding. A woman in a bathrobe pointed to a blue trailer in the back. "That's the one with the boy," she said. "Keeps to himself, doesn't cause trouble." I knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Nothing. As I turned to leave, I saw the curtain shift behind a side window. Someone was in there. I went back to the car, scribbled my name and number on a library notepad I kept in the glove box, and left it tucked in the door frame. Then I drove back toward the boardwalk and waited. Around 5, the fog started rolling back in. I sat on a bench near where the boy had been that morning, watching the people move past. A little before 6, I saw him again. Hoodie pulled tight guitar case slung over his shoulder. He moved like someone who'd learned how to disappear. I stood. "Lucas," I said, voice low. He froze. didn't run, but his eyes were wide, watchful. "I'm not here to hurt you," I said. "I just need to ask you something." He didn't speak. I stepped forward slowly. "My son disappeared 10 years ago. You look like him. You sing like him." That song, I only ever sang it to him. He stared at me, still silent. "Were you born in 2006? I asked. His jaw tightened. "I don't know when I was born." "Do you have parents? No. Do you remember anything from when you were little?" A pause, then quietly, "Sometimes. In dreams." I pulled out my phone, showed him a photo of Tommy from 2nd grade. Red jacket, crooked smile. "Do you recognize him?" "No." I nodded. "If you're not him, I'm sorry. But if you are, you don't have to be alone anymore." He turned and walked away. I didn't chase him. That night, I sat in a roadside motel with the photo still in my hand. I wasn't sure what I'd found, but I was sure I wasn't going home yet. Around 11 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Same distorted voice as before. "You shouldn't be here. You're closer than you think. But you won't like what you find." I swallowed. "Who are you?" There was a pause. Then, "You're looking at the wrong son." The line went dead. I didn't sleep much that night. The voice on the phone played over and over in my head, flat and low, like it had been run through a filter. "You're looking at the wrong son." I sat by the motel window watching the fog roll off the water, trying to figure out what that meant. I kept thinking back to the boy Lucas and the way he'd looked at the photo of Tommy. Not blank, not startled, just quiet. Like maybe it wasn't unfamiliar, just unreachable. I left early, just after sunrise, and drove back to the trailer park. The streets were empty damp from the overnight mist. I walked past the same row of rusted mailboxes through gravel paths still holding tire tracks from the night before. The trailer I'd visited yesterday was dark. The note I'd left had been removed. I knocked again, this time firmer. After a long pause, a woman opened the door. She looked to be in her early 60s, calm, neatly dressed, not what I expected. "Can I help you?" she asked. I introduced myself, told her I was looking for the boy who sometimes played guitar on the boardwalk. I said I believed he might be my son. She stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. "My name is Linda March," she said. "I run a private shelter, temporary housing. Most of the kids come here with no history they're willing to share. I don't ask for more than they're ready to give." I told her I wasn't with the state, that I wasn't trying to take anyone. I just needed to know the truth. She looked at me steadily. "Lucas has been here for 3 years. He came alone. No name, no background, just fear." I showed her the photo again. Tommy in 2nd grade, red jacket, slight overbite. "Do you recognize him?" She didn't look away. "He's not your son." "How do you know that?" "Because I know every child who's ever stayed under my roof." Her tone didn't rise, but there was a line in it, final, firm. Sometimes people want something so badly they start seeing it where it isn't. I told her about the song, about the shoe, about the initials scratched into the concrete under the church. She listened, but her expression never changed. "If you're wrong, I said you're keeping a child from his family." "And if you're wrong," she said softly, "you're projecting your grief onto a boy who's finally starting to feel safe." There was a silence after that. She didn't invite me in. I didn't press it. I left and sat in my car for over an hour, parked across the street with the engine off. I didn't know if I was waiting for Lucas or just trying to outlast the ache in my chest. Around 4 o'clock, I saw him. Hoodie pulled up, guitar case slung over his shoulder, same deliberate gait. I got out of the car and followed him at a distance. He didn't go to the boardwalk this time. He cut across a series of back streets until he reached a small park overlooking the water. Willow trees arched low over the benches, and he picked one near the far end, pulled out his guitar, and started tuning softly. I approached slowly. "Mind if I sit?" He didn't say yes, but he didn't move either. I sat beside him, leaving space between us. "I talked to the woman who runs your place," I said. "She said you've been there a while, that you don't remember much." He kept his eyes on the strings, gently picking through a melody. I told him about the lake house, about how Tommy used to throw rocks from the dock and name the splashes. He called the big ones crashers and the little ones blippers. Lucas glanced sideways just for a second, then looked back down. I reached into my coat and pulled out the red shoe, set it carefully on the bench between us. "You used to wear these almost every day," I said. "We found one under the church, buried." His hands slowed. The guitar went still. After a long pause, he said, "I used to have a dog, I think. Brown ears." Name started with an S. My throat tightened. "Sammy," I said. "He followed you everywhere." Lucas nodded once, barely perceptible. "I don't know who I am," he said. "I just don't feel like anybody." I let the silence settle around us. "You don't have to remember everything I said. You don't even have to remember me. But you deserve to know where you came from." He looked out at the water. "Okay." That night we drove to a clinic 2 towns inland, the kind that stays open late and doesn't ask questions. We submitted saliva samples, signed the forms, paid in cash. They told us it would take a week. Back at the motel, I got a message from Ava. It just said, "You need to come home. Something's happened." Then a second message, this one from an unknown number. Attached was a photo Rachel standing in the window of our house, taken from the sidewalk, not zoomed, not distant, close. The timestamp was barely 2 hours old. I left Lucas at the motel with the key and told him I'd be back. He didn't ask questions. I think he already understood. I drove through the night. Every mile back home felt like a stretch of something pulling tight across my chest. I got there just after 4 in the morning. The porch light was on. Rachel was safe. She'd called the police after Ava reached out. Said a man had been standing near the side gate the night before. Never knocked. Just looked at the windows, then left. The officer who came didn't stay long. Filed a report. No follow-up. No patrol car. "They think we're just grieving," she said. "Like we've gotten lost in it." I showed her the photo. Her jaw clenched. "We can't stay quiet anymore," I said. She nodded. That afternoon, I called Ava. "I need everything you can find on Daniel," I told her. Last name, where he worked, where he lived, anything. She called back a few hours later. I found something she said. Daniel used to go by a different name. Daniel March. I stood in the hallway with the phone pressed to my ear. Any relation to Linda? I think they're siblings, she said. Same last name, same town of birth. The air felt heavier after that, as if something that had been buried was finally starting to shift. Back at the motel, I returned to the room to find Lucas sitting cross-legged on the floor watching cartoons with the volume low. I handed him a worn piece of paper, a child's drawing. Our old house stick figures labeled Mom, Dad, Me. You drew this, I said. We found it under the church, hidden with the shoe. He studied it, but didn't say anything. I didn't go to church, he said quietly. You did. Once. After you disappeared. Maybe Daniel took you there. Maybe Linda. I don't know. He turned the paper slowly in his hands. Why would they keep that? I don't know, I said. Guilt. Proof. Control. That night, Ava called again. Linda ran foster homes in 3 counties over the last 15 years. None of them licensed. No charges either, just quiet. And Daniel? I asked. There was a pause. He was questioned in another missing persons case. A girl named Hannah Llewellyn, 9 years old, vanished 6 months before Tommy did. My stomach sank. Was he charged? No. Said he was in the area for work. No one followed up. I hung up the phone and sat there in the dark, watching Lucas breathe softly on the other bed. I didn't know what he remembered. I didn't know how much of what I saw in him was real and how much was need. But I did know something had been taken, not just from us, from him. And someone had built their life on making sure it stayed that way. In the morning, I was going to the trailer. This time, I wasn't asking. The next morning, I drove straight back to the trailer. I didn't call ahead. Didn't knock. I stepped up onto the porch and pushed the door open with the side of my shoulder. It gave too easily. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from sleep or privacy. This was the kind that hangs in the air after someone's left in a hurry. The furniture was still there, but the space felt staged. A coffee mug in the sink bed made 2 neatly closet doors open, but nearly empty. No clothes, no food, no personal photographs. I moved to the back hallway and tried the door to what looked like a utility closet. It didn't open. I took a breath, stepped back, and gave it one firm kick. The lock gave. Inside, behind an uneven patch of carpet, I found a section of floor that wasn't nailed down. I pried it up with my keys and found a small wooden box wedged under the joists. Inside were things no one should have been keeping: tiny plastic bags with baby teeth, faded medical forms, and old school ID I didn't recognize. And on top, a small journal, cloth-bound. The initials TL, barely visible on the cover. I opened it slowly. Most of the pages held drawings, loose sketches of a house, a tree, sometimes a woman's face, sometimes just the word "don't," written over and over again in different colors. On the last page, one sentence in a child's block letters: Mr. March says we don't have to be who we were. I sat there on the floor for a while, just holding it. The room smelled like plywood and air freshener. But the box didn't. The box smelled like dust and smoke. When I stepped out into the hallway, a shadow passed behind the window. I moved toward the front door just in time to see a man standing across the road beneath a flickering streetlight. His posture was straight, hands in his pockets, watching me like he'd been there the whole time. I stepped down off the porch and crossed the road, stopping just a few feet from him. "You took him," I said. He didn't move, just watched me with a look that wasn't smug exactly. It was quieter than that. Settled, like this moment had already happened before. "I gave him a life," he said. His voice was soft, steady. "From what?" "From us," I asked. "From the people who loved him." He tilted his head slightly, like he was trying to see something in me. "Do you have any idea how many children disappear into nothing? No one looking, no one fighting. I gave him stability, a new name, a clean start." I stepped closer. "You stole his name. You stole his family. You built a lie and called it rescue." He didn't blink. He didn't know who he was. And when I found him, he didn't want to. I felt the journal still in my hand, the edge of the wood box pressing against my ribs under my coat. "He remembers more than you think," I said. "He's getting tested. We're going to prove who he is." Daniel gave a thin smile. "It's not over," he said. "Not yet." Then a sound behind me, quick, sharp, like metal catching concrete. I turned. Across the road, the trailer had lit up. First the porch, then the windows, orange light blooming in the glass. I ran. Smoke hit me before I even made it to the steps. I kicked open the front door again, but the heat shoved back hard. The living room wall was already swallowing flame. Nothing left to salvage. I backed out, coughing, blinking through the sting in my eyes. When I turned, Daniel was gone. Just the streetlight humming, casting long shadows across the empty gravel lot. Sirens came quick after that. I stayed and gave a statement to a local deputy who looked younger than Tommy had been when he disappeared. He asked if anyone had been inside. I told him no. The trailer had been empty. But I didn't say how I knew. I didn't mention the journal or the box. Those stayed in my coat. That night I drove back to the motel covered in ash. Lucas was sitting on the floor, legs crossed, the TV still on, but muted. He looked up when I walked in. "I saw the fire," he said. "I was coming back when I saw him." "Daniel?" I asked. He nodded. "Did he talk to you?" "No," Lucas said. "He saw me." Then he turned around and walked away. I sat down across from him, pulled out the journal, and laid it on the bed. "You ever seen this before?" He looked at it for a long time, then said, "He told me no one was coming for me, that my old life didn't exist." "He lied," I said. Lucas didn't argue. He just kept looking at the journal like it might move if he stared hard enough. "You never stopped looking," he said. "Not for a single day," I told him. He leaned forward slowly, just enough to rest his arms on his knees. "I want to know the truth," he said, "whatever it is." I nodded. "We'll find it." The next morning I made a call I'd been avoiding for years. Ron Keller had been the lead detective on Tommy's case. He retired 6 years ago. I wasn't sure if he'd pick up, but he did. Voice rough with sleep. I told him everything. The candle, the shoe, the boy, the photo, the journal, the fire. "It's time," I said. "We're done sitting quiet." He didn't hesitate. "Send me what you've got. I'll help however I can." Later that afternoon, as the sun started burning through the mist outside the motel window, I turned to Lucas. He was watching the parking lot guitar across his lap, but untouched. "You ready?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, but then he nodded. "Yeah," he said. "Let's finish it." In my pocket was the envelope from the clinic, still sealed. We were going to open it together, but somehow we already knew what it would say. We opened the envelope in silence. Just me, Lucas, and the steady hum of the motel fridge. I unfolded the sheet slowly, even though we already knew what it would say. It was there in black and white, 99.9% match. Paternity confirmed. I looked over at him. He didn't cry, didn't speak. He just stared at the paper like it was something fragile and sharp, something that had weight and could still cut. I reached across the table and slid it closer to him. "That's your name," I said. "Thomas Langley." He ran a thumb over the edge of the page, then folded it once and tucked it inside the journal. He didn't say anything else, but his hands stopped shaking. That night, I called Keller again. Told him about the fire, about the man across the street, about the DNA results. "You sure about this?" he asked. "Positive," I said. "Then it's time we got our own look at that church." The next morning we met at St. Jude's just before dawn. The place was still locked up, same as always, but Keller had kept his old master key from the precinct. He said the church had never changed the locks, and he was right. The front door opened with a soft click, and we slipped inside. The air was cold and stale. Still smelled faintly like candle wax and cedar polish. Lucas stayed behind with Rachel, who hadn't let go of him since the test came in. Keller and I walked slowly down the center aisle, our footsteps echoing under the high rafters. The basement door was in the back, narrow, with paint chipped off around the knob. I hadn't been down there in years, not since the second week of the investigation. It opened onto a short flight of stairs, and as we descended, the light shifted from soft gray to deep shadow. Keller flicked on his flashlight and held it low. The basement looked almost exactly as I remembered it. Cement floor, water heater in the corner, stack of folding chairs. But something felt off, like space had shifted. I walked toward the far wall to the patch of concrete where the shoe had been found. I ran my hand along the cinder block, searching for seams, for anything that didn't quite line up. Then I saw it 4 faint numbers etched into the base of the wall, 1974. Not a construction date. A code. Keller and I stepped back, scanning the room, and there it was. A panel near the heater square and slightly discolored like it had been replaced at some point. I reached for it and felt resistance, but not much. It wasn't locked, just wedged. We pulled it loose together, revealing a small cavity behind it, maybe 2 feet wide, 3 feet deep. Inside was a box, wooden, lined with red velvet that had gone dull with time. On top, a stack of index cards held together with a frayed ribbon. Keller pulled them out, flipped through slowly. Each one had a name, a date, a child's initials. Some had an address, others just a town. "What is this?" I asked. "It's not just Tommy," Keller said. "This goes back decades." Beneath the cards was something else, a bundle of photos. Some looked old, sun-faded. Kids at park, school, steps, bus stops. None of them labeled. But I recognized one. Hannah Llewellyn, the girl Ava had mentioned. Keller took out his phone and started snapping pictures. "We need to log all of this. Quietly. before anyone finds out we were here. We packed everything into his bag and sealed the panel back up. Before we left, I walked over to the far corner where the pews used to be stored. There, scrawled along the edge of the baseboard in what looked like old crayon, were the words, "I stayed here." Underneath, faint but still visible, Tommy L. Back outside, the morning light was breaking through the clouds. Keller walked to his car, made a few calls to old contacts, said he'd start moving things through unofficial channels first. "We pushed this the wrong way," he said, "and they'll bury it again." I drove home. Lucas was on the back porch with Rachel sipping orange juice out of the same glass he used to use as a kid. She'd saved it all these years. I told them what we found. I didn't sugarcoat it. Rachel listened quietly, one hand resting lightly on Lucas's knee. "So he kept records?" she asked. "Like trophies?" "I think it was more than that," I said. "I think it was a system." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that box, the index cards, how many names, how many families, and how no one had looked in all this time. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Keller. I ran one of the names through the old database. Came up on a closed file. Girl went missing in 1983. Name was Melissa Crane. Disappeared walking home from piano lessons. No suspects. But guess who was working as a part-time custodian at her school that year? I didn't have to guess. Daniel March, I said. And he worked at the church for a time after that. Small jobs, repairs, kept changing towns, but never too far. This wasn't just some one-time thing, Keller said. This was organized. We hung up. I went out back to check the locks. Just habit at this point. But as I rounded the side of the house, I noticed something stuck in the fence. A folded piece of paper, weather-worn, tucked between the slats like it had been slid in hours earlier. I pulled it out carefully. 4 words written in thick black ink. He remembers more now. I turned slowly, scanning the yard. No one there. No sound except the wind moving through the trees. I went back inside and locked the door. Upstairs, Lucas was asleep, but beside his bed, I noticed the journal had been opened. A fresh page had been added, same handwriting as the note, same pen. At the bottom of the page, a name I didn't recognize. Just one word, Clara. I waited until Lucas was asleep again before opening the journal. His handwriting had changed. Not just the pen or the angle, but the pressure stronger, more certain. And that name, Clara. I didn't recognize it, but something about it stuck. I took a picture of the page and sent it to Keller, asked him to cross-reference it with the names in the box. 20 minutes later, he called. "There's a Clara Jansen," he said. "Disappeared in 95. Indiana. 9 years old. Her card's in the stack." I didn't speak for a second. Just stared out the window at the empty street beyond our porch. "She yours?" he asked. "She's his," I said. "He remembers her." "It's time," Keller said. "We're going to March's property. Tonight." It was nearly 10 p.m. by the time we pulled onto the gravel road that led toward the woods behind March's last listed address. He hadn't returned since the fire. The place had been cleared, the land quiet. But his name was still on the property records for a parcel farther out, undeveloped acreage past the tree line. No utilities, no structures on file, but Keller had a hunch. We parked a quarter-mile back and made our way in on foot. The woods were thicker than I remembered, overgrown quiet, like the ground hadn't been disturbed in years. But as we got deeper, the trees thinned and we saw it. A small concrete structure tucked low into the hillside. No windows, barely taller than a shed. A door flush with the ground sat at an angle like a cellar with no house above it. Keller went first, flashlight low. The door had a padlock, but it was old, rusted, cracked from weather. He popped it with a crowbar. The hinges creaked when the door swung open, revealing a narrow set of stairs that dropped into darkness. The air that came up was stale, wet. I followed him down. My boots hit solid cement and the sound echoed tight and flat. The walls were cinder block painted once but peeling now. A row of single bulb fixtures hung from the ceiling, none of them lit. Keller clicked on his headlamp. That's when we saw the doors. 4 of them evenly spaced like storage units, each one steel, each with a small slot cut low, the kind used in holding cells. Jesus, Keller said, voice barely above a whisper. I walked to the first and crouched. There was dust inside. Empty now. But the walls were covered in scratch marks, some deep, some faint. On the far side, someone had written in chalk, "Clara was here." I checked the second. Same layout, same scratches. But this one had something else, an old blanket bunched in the corner, and on the floor a single sneaker, child-sized. I picked it up, turned it slowly in my hand. The name Jordan was written on the tongue in faded marker. I remembered that case. Boy from Missouri vanished in 2002. His photo had been on the news for weeks. No suspects, no leads. I looked at Keller. How long do you think he was doing this? Too long, he said. The third door was jammed, but we forced it open. This one had shelves, labeled boxes, photos, journals, lockets, school reports, every one tagged with initials and dates. March hadn't just taken them. He'd documented them, tracked them, like cataloging a collection. The fourth door wouldn't open, not rusted sealed, bolted from the inside. Keller banged twice. Nothing. Then we heard it movement. A faint shuffle, the sound of something brushing against metal. Then silence again. We froze. "Hello," Keller called. No answer. He leaned in close to the small slot. "If someone's in there, we're here to help." A pause. Then, barely audible, a voice. "Is he gone?" I felt the breath leave my chest. Keller leaned closer. "Yes. You're safe. Can you open the door?" A long pause, then a mechanical click. The bolt slid free from the inside and the door creaked open an inch. Keller pushed it gently. Inside was a small room, maybe 6 feet by 8. A mattress on the floor. A plastic crate with water bottles. And standing in the far corner, shielding her eyes from the light, was a girl. Pale. Thin. Maybe 12. She looked up at us, blinking slowly. "What's your name?" Keller asked, voice low. "Clara," she said. I stepped forward. "Clara Jansen." She nodded once. I felt my knees lock. "How long have you been here?" Keller asked. "I don't know," she said. He said we were underground because it was safer. He said the sky was broken. We guided her out, slowly wrapped her in Keller's jacket. Her steps were cautious, uneven, like she hadn't stood in sunlight for a long time. We didn't speak much on the way back, just moved quickly, quietly, called it in from the car. Keller pulled every string he had to keep it off the scanner for now. We knew we'd only bought ourselves a little time before it all broke wide. Back at the house, I didn't go inside right away. Just stood under the porch light and looked up at the sky. It wasn't broken, but it sure felt different now. I didn't tell Lucas that night. He was already asleep again, and I wanted him to have one more quiet morning before everything changed. Before the world found out what had really been happening out there in the woods. Before every name in that box stopped being a statistic and became a story someone had to tell. The press found out before sunrise. By 8 a.m., the gravel road leading to the concrete cellar was blocked off with yellow tape, and marked units from 3 different counties had started combing the surrounding woods. Clara was taken into protective custody, and I heard from Keller just before she was moved to the hospital for evaluation. He said she asked if the sky was still cracked. When they told her no, she just stared at the window and whispered. Then he lied about that too. Within 24 hours, the FBI stepped in. That box of index cards we found. It had entries spanning almost 40 years, some from out of state, some with dates but no names. Most didn't have last names at all, just initials, sometimes colors or ages. It was methodical, deliberate. March had kept a record of everyone, and from the look of it, he hadn't been working alone. I spent the better part of that week at the station piecing together connections from old reports, missing persons logs, anything Keller could pull without raising alarms. I could feel the shift in the building. Detectives who'd once brushed off my questions were now asking for copies of the journal, and the whiteboard in the main bullpen was filling with names that had been forgotten for decades. There were a few arrests, quiet ones. 2 men who'd done time with March in the 90s, both of them listed as maintenance contractors at small rural schools over the years. One had moved to Kentucky. The other lived just 2 counties over. When they searched his home, they found photos in a locked freezer chest. Children. Most with dates and initials that matched the cards. The hardest part was sitting down with Lucas and explaining what it all meant. That March wasn't just one monster, that he was part of something older, something that had managed to stay hidden because no one ever looked closely enough. Lucas asked if the kids in those cards were dead. I told him not all of them. I reminded him that Clara survived. That he did. But we don't know why, do we? He asked. Why some got to come home and some didn't? I shook my head. No, I said. We don't. Clara stayed in observation for almost 2 weeks. She barely spoke. When she did, it was in fragments, songs, routines, things March had drilled into her. But eventually she said something that caught Keller's attention. He used to talk to someone on the radio, she told the therapist. But not like music radio, like walkie-talkie radio. They had a name. Cardinal 1. That's when we knew March wasn't running this alone. That there were others still out there, maybe still active. The FBI opened a federal racketeering file which told me they were treating it as an organized operation. But the town, it stayed quiet. There were no press conferences, no sirens, just short blurbs in the regional papers about an ongoing investigation. The church where it all started was sealed off officially for asbestos abatement. I knew better. I saw the truck that pulled up after hours, unmarked, out-of-state tags. I wasn't supposed to be near the scene, but I watched from across the cemetery. 2 men got out, neither in uniform. They carried out boxes wrapped in plastic, loaded them into the van, and drove off. No lights, no announcement. Just like that. Keller called a few days later, told me he was being reassigned. Internal Affairs is looking into my old records, he said, pulling files I haven't touched in years. I asked him if he was being pushed out. Not yet, he said. But someone wants me quiet. That night I opened Lucas's journal again. He hadn't written in it for days, but wedged between the last few pages was something new, a folded paper torn at the edge. It was a map, hand-drawn, just a few lines and a circle marked with a small X. No label, no date, but I recognized the shape. It was the river behind Langley's farm, March's old property long before he bought the church lot. I copied the sketch, didn't tell Lucas I'd found it. The next morning I drove out to the riverbank. There was nothing there at first, just the sound of water and wind in the trees. But something about the ground looked off. Too even, too clean. I walked a slow circle around the X on the map. Eventually I saw it 2 stones set flat in the dirt like markers. No names, just faint impressions like someone had used them as placeholders. I didn't dig. I just stood there letting the silence stretch. Whatever had happened here, it was over now. But it wasn't gone. Back at home, Lucas was in the kitchen pouring cereal. He looked up when I came in. "You went to the river, didn't you?" he said. I didn't answer, just set the keys down and nodded. "She was nice to me," he said suddenly. "The one before Clara. She had red hair. I don't remember her name." I sat down across from him, waited. I think she sang to me when I was scared, like a lullaby. "Do you remember what happened to her?" I asked. He was quiet for a long time. Then he shook his head. "I don't think she left." I reached across the table, covered his hand with mine. "It's not your fault," I said. He nodded, but I'm not sure he believed it. The next day, Clara was moved to a long-term care facility in Ohio, somewhere quiet, somewhere she could start over. She asked Keller if she could take one thing from the church, just one, the chalk, the same piece she used to write her name on the wall. "So I don't forget, I'm real," she said. "Keller told me that story over the phone." His voice cracked for the first time in weeks. "She was 12, he said, "and we almost missed her." I didn't say anything. There wasn't much left to say. The cards, the cellar, the map, they'd opened the door. But justice. That was going to be slow, messy, partial. Some of the names would never be found. Some of the people responsible would never be tried. But the story was no longer buried. And in this kind of darkness, sometimes light doesn't come all at once. It just flickers in small places, enough to see by, enough to keep walking. Sometimes I still drive past the church. The roof's gone now, ripped off during a spring storm not long after Clara was moved. The county marked it for demolition, but the work keeps getting delayed. Permits, budget, red tape. I think part of me is glad it's still there, rotting piece by piece. Like it's being erased slowly the way everything else was, just this time in the open. Lucas doesn't ask about Clara much anymore. He's back in school, got a dog this fall, even joined the junior fire cadets. There are days he laughs like none of it happened. Then there are nights when he walks into the hallway around 2 a.m. and just stands there silent. I don't ask questions. I sit with him, turn the hall light on low, and wait. Sometimes he speaks, sometimes he doesn't, but he always goes back to bed eventually. That's progress, I think. Keller called a few weeks back. Said the case files officially closed on March. Deceased. No further suspects named. No charges filed. The FBI didn't deny the operation, they just buried it under a sealed report and moved on. What's left are the cards. Some got matched, others didn't. Families came forward or they didn't. Some wanted answers. Some couldn't bear to know. And I understand that now. There are things you carry because forgetting would feel like betrayal, but there are also things too heavy to hold without breaking. Clara's letter came in late October. Just a few lines. Her handwriting was neat, blocky. She said she was learning to read again, really read, that she liked the quiet in Ohio, that she had a window in her room and a small garden patch she could see from bed. No sign-off, no signature. Just the last line written twice. I remember my name now. I keep that letter in my nightstand between 2 pages of Lucas's journal. He stopped writing in it last month. Told me he wanted to start fresh, new notebook, no ghosts, he said. I didn't press. Just handed him a new spiral-bound pad and said I'd keep the old one safe. I haven't opened it since. People ask sometimes what justice looks like in a case like this. I don't have a clean answer. The man responsible is dead. Some of his accomplices may still be out there. The system's already shifted its focus to the next file, the next crisis. But for me, justice wasn't about punishment. It was about pulling something back into the light so the silence couldn't swallow it. So Clara wasn't just a missing girl with no last name. So Lucas didn't grow up thinking no one came for him. So March's records didn't stay buried with him. The truth doesn't always fix what was broken, but it lets you decide what comes next with your eyes open. And for a long time, I didn't think that was possible. I do now. If this story meant something to you, if it made you remember someone, or question something, or just feel less alone, consider sharing it. Let their names keep echoing. Let the silence finally end.